The only real difference between him and Basil is that he was small and had a very large hen-pecking wife.
Fawlty Towers is often hailed as one of the greatest British comedies, cherished for its sharp wit and unforgettable characters. But behind the laughter lay a moment that shocked audiences and changed the show's trajectory forever. What happened that was so controversial it stopped the beloved series in its tracks? Surprisingly, it wasn't poor ratings or creative differences that ended Fawlty Towers, but a single scene that sparked widespread outrage and forced a permanent halt. Today, we're diving into the story behind that scene, revealing how it altered one of television's most iconic sitcoms forever. The controversial scene explained. At the heart of Fawlty Towers' sudden end lies a single episode that sparked an unexpected uproar. Known for cheeky humor and sharp satire, the show had always pushed boundaries, but this particular scene went further than many viewers were prepared to accept. It featured material that some found offensive and hurtful, igniting debates about whether comedy should have limits. Although the exact details remain sensitive, the impact was immediate, shaking the confidence of both the BBC and the show's creators. While some fans dismissed the outcry as exaggerated, the scene touched on delicate social issues at a time when attitudes toward race and representation were beginning to shift. The backlash revealed deeper concerns about responsibility in entertainment, especially for a program so widely beloved. What made the moment so incendiary was not only what appeared on screen, but the cultural context that amplified its effect. The significance of the episode unfolded gradually as discussions spread among viewers, media outlets, and regulators. Debates centered on how far comedy could go and whether Fawlty Towers had crossed a line. The creators faced growing pressure to defend their work while balancing artistic intentions against public sentiment. Despite the shockwaves sent by this scene, it's important to understand what made Fawlty Towers so special before the controversy. Fawlty Towers' rise to fame. When Fawlty Towers aired in 1975, it quickly won acclaim for its sharp writing, unforgettable characters, and chaotic comedic style. Though it ran for only 2 short seasons, 12 episodes, it left a lasting impact on audiences and critics. Its blend of farce and incisive social observation, set in a dysfunctional Torquay hotel, made it a standout and one of Britain's greatest sitcoms. John Cleese's Basil Fawlty, with his explosive temper and desperate attempts to maintain control, became the centerpiece of a sitcom that was as unpredictable as it was hilarious.
Bigger than me, so we decided to reverse that. But otherwise, I mean, he was just wonderfully bad-tempered. I went up to the desk the first day and said, excuse me, and he's one of those people who doesn't look up. You know, you stand at the desk and and it goes on for, you think, did he hear me? And then you say, excuse me, yes!
According to later reflections by Cleese, the show's success was no accident. He emphasized the intense care and craftsmanship involved, noting years later that making such comedy required taking huge amounts of time and infinite pains to build characters and tightly scripted scenarios that consistently delivered laughs. Despite its relatively few episodes, Fawlty Towers reached an international audience, influencing comedians and sitcoms worldwide and cementing its reputation as a classic. Cleese himself has commented on the show's legacy, observing that there has been nothing really good on British television since, and lamenting that comedy has struggled to maintain the high standards set by earlier work. Yet even as Fawlty Towers rose to prominence, its humor reflected the social attitudes of its era, elements that later drew criticism as cultural perspectives shifted. Cleese maintained that the show's more contentious moments were designed to highlight the absurdity of prejudice rather than support it, using exaggerated characters to reveal the flaws in certain behaviors rather than to legitimize them. And understanding how the show evolved behind the scenes reveals even more about the creative forces that shaped its daring and sometimes divisive approach to comedy. The creative minds behind the show. John Cleese and Connie Booth, the co-creators and primary writers of Fawlty Towers, set out to craft a sitcom that combined meticulous writing with bold, provocative humor. Their partnership, both creative and performative, gave the series its distinctive tone, built on sharp dialogue, character-driven chaos, and carefully structured comedic scenarios. Cleese often emphasized that the show's humor was never meant to endorse offensive attitudes, but rather to ridicule them. When controversy arose decades later, He defended the creative strategy behind depicting prejudiced or foolish behavior. As he explained in the BBC article, "I would have hoped that someone at the BBC would understand that there are two ways of making fun of human behavior. One is to attack it directly. The other is to have someone who is patently a figure of fun speak up on behalf of that behavior." But even with such intentions, the line between satire and discomfort could be thin. Cleese acknowledged years later the inherent pressure that comes with producing highly acclaimed comedy. Reflecting on the possibility of ever returning to the series, he noted that, "When you do something that is generally accepted as being very good, how do you top it? The expectation is so high." This pressure partly explains why the show sometimes pushed boundaries. It was built on the belief that taking creative risks was essential to maintaining its comedic edge. However, those risks increasingly collided with shifting cultural standards. The article recounts how scenes featuring Major Gowan were edited out by some broadcasters, and an episode was even temporarily removed before being reinstated with a warning about offensive content and language. These reactions underscored a widening gap between the creator's original intentions and the evolving expectations of modern audiences. This complex relationship between creative vision and public response is where the story's tension sharpens, leading directly into the heated backlash that followed. Public and critical backlash. The reaction to the controversial scene was swift and intense, catching both the BBC and the creators by surprise. Viewers flooded the network with complaints, expressing shock and disappointment at the language and imagery they saw as offensive. Media coverage amplified the uproar, fueling debates about whether humor involving racial stereotypes had a place on television. This backlash emerged during a period of growing public awareness around race and representation, making audiences less tolerant of material once dismissed as harmless. The scale of the criticism made it clear that attitudes toward comedic boundaries were shifting. Critics and industry figures soon joined the discussion, questioning the BBC's responsibility as a public broadcaster. Some viewed the moment as an isolated misstep in an otherwise acclaimed series, while others argued it crossed a line that mainstream television should not accept. The BBC struggled to balance defending artistic freedom with responding to increasing demands for sensitivity. This tension highlighted evolving standards of what was acceptable in comedy and signaled broader cultural changes in Britain. As pressure grew, concerns mounted that continued controversy could damage the BBC's reputation. Internal debates reflected the conflict between supporting creative expression and acknowledging social responsibility, leaving the show's future uncertain. Even as the backlash raged, those working on the show faced their own struggles with what had happened. The aftermath for the cast and crew. For John Cleese and the cast, the controversy was more than just public criticism. It created a sense of personal and professional turmoil. Cleese later reflected on how the scene's reception profoundly affected him, revealing cracks in what had seemed like an unshakable success.
Because Sybil seems to be running the show, and so there's not much spare sympathy, which is, I think that's quite interesting. It tells us a lot about how people respond to other people, that it's helplessness that really makes us feel good about them, you know?
The actors found themselves at the center of a storm that questioned not just their work, but the values they represented. This sudden glare of scrutiny strained relationships and forced many to reconsider the impact of their creative choices in a changing cultural landscape. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere grew tense as the cast and crew grappled with mixed emotions. Some felt misunderstood, believing they intended to satirize bigotry rather than endorse it. Others worried about the long-term effects on their careers, unsure if the controversy would overshadow their achievements. The experience highlighted the precarious nature of working in comedy, a field where timing and context can dramatically alter perception. This period brought a sobering realization that success did not guarantee immunity from public judgment or backlash. Ultimately, the fallout contributed directly to the decision not to continue Fawlty Towers beyond its original run. The combination of external pressure and internal fatigue made it clear that moving forward would be complicated, if not impossible. This complex ending opened the door to important conversations about comedy's evolving role and responsibility. Legacy and lessons learned. The controversy that ended Fawlty Towers marked a pivotal moment for both the show and British comedy. It highlighted a changing cultural landscape in which once accepted jokes were reevaluated under new social standards, prompting broader discussions about the responsibilities of comedians when addressing sensitive subjects. The incident showed that satire, while influential, can cause unintended harm when it collides with evolving values, emphasizing the need to balance humor with awareness in a diverse society. Despite the backlash, Fawlty Towers remains a landmark in television history, celebrated for its inventive comedy, even as its most contentious moments continue to spark debate.
Fishwife! What? No, not fish. Small.
The scene that contributed to its shutdown is frequently cited in conversations about shifting attitudes toward race and representation, influencing writers and performers to consider the impact of their work more carefully. Its legacy is both enduring and complex, reminding audiences that comedy must evolve alongside the culture it reflects. Fawlty Towers left an unforgettable mark on television, but its sudden end teaches us about the changing nature of comedy and the importance of cultural awareness. This story shows that while humor can challenge us, it must also be mindful of its impact. If you found this dive into television history interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories behind the scenes.